This is a story that came to me via a long, detailed email from a man named William. He wanted to share his experience as a cautionary tale for anyone, especially expats, who thinks that love conquers all when family boundaries are involved. It's a story about the clash between Western individualism and a certain type of toxic family entitlement, set against the humid, neon-lit backdrop of Kuala Lumpur. Before we dive into William's own words, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing these incredible stories with you every day. All right, grab your coffee or your tea. Let's get into William's story. My name is William. I'm 62 years old, a retired structural engineer from Seattle, and for the last 5 years, I've called Kuala Lumpur my home. People often ask me why I chose Malaysia. They expect me to say the food or the weather, and while the laksa is world-class and I don't miss the Seattle rain, the real answer is simpler. I wanted a place where I could build a final, peaceful chapter on my own terms. I've spent my entire career obsessed with foundations. If the foundation isn't right, the skyscraper will lean. If the soil isn't tested, the bridge will collapse. I applied that same logic to my personal life after watching my younger brother, David, lose everything. David was a successful surgeon who married for love and forgot the math. When his marriage ended, his ex-wife didn't just take half. She took the legacy ranch our grandfather had left us, the retirement accounts, and even his dignity. My father, a man of few words and even fewer emotions, sat me down after David's divorce was finalized. "William," he said, staring at the blueprints on my desk, "a house is just wood and stone, but a home is an asset. Never let a woman or anyone else take the ground you stand on. Protect the foundation." I took that to heart. When I retired, I sold my firm and my house in Washington and moved to KL on an MM2H, Malaysia my second home, visa. I didn't want a sterile high-rise condo in Mont Kiara with a bunch of other expats. I wanted something with bones. I found it in Taman Tun Dr. Ismail, TTDI, as the locals call it. It was an old double-story terrace house, built in the 70s, sagging under decades of neglect. I spent 18 months and nearly $200,000 stripping it to the studs. I reinforced the beams, installed industrial floor-to-ceiling windows, and created an open-concept sanctuary with a koi pond in the middle of the living room. It was my masterpiece. It was paid for in cash. It was mine and mine alone. I met Cathy during my second year in the city. I was sitting at a rooftop bar near KLCC, watching the sunset hit the Petronas Towers when she sat down at the table next to mine. She was 34, a marketing manager for a major hotel chain, and she had a laugh that could cut through the thickest KL humidity. She was non-Muslim, modern, and seemed incredibly independent. "You look like you're calculating the wind load on those towers," she said, nodding toward the skyscrapers. I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another professional," she replied. "I spend my days selling dreams of luxury. You look like you're interested in the reality of the steel." Our first few months were a dream. Cathy was a whirlwind of energy. She took me to hidden speakeasy bars in Petaling Street and introduced me to the best banana leaf rice in Bangsar. She was smart, spoke 4 languages, and seemed to have her own life perfectly under control. For a man my age, she was a shot of adrenaline. By the 1-year mark, we started talking about the future. I was cautious. I told her about David. I told her about my father's advice. I told her that I loved her, but that I had spent 40 years building my foundation, and I wouldn't risk it for anyone. "I'm an independent woman, William," she told me over dinner one night. "I have my own career. I don't need your house. I just want you." When I proposed, it was with a condition. We would sign a premarital agreement. Under Malaysian law, especially for non-Muslims, the courts generally respect premarital assets, but I wanted it ironclad. I hired a top-tier lawyer in KL to draft a document stating that the TTDI house, my American retirement funds, and my investments remain my sole property. Anything we built together, our joint lifestyle, we would share, but the foundation was mine. Cathy signed it without a blink. "It's just paper," she said. "We're building a life, not a legal case." We had a beautiful wedding at a boutique hotel in the city. Her family was there, of course. That was my first real introduction to the Lee clan. Her mother, Madam Lee, was a woman who seemed to be made of gold jewelry and judgment. She spent the entire reception complaining about the heat, despite the air conditioning being set to a crisp 18 degrees. Then there was Cathy's younger sister, Michelle. Michelle was 29, twice divorced, and accompanied by two rowdy children who spent the evening trying to climb the hotel's floral arrangements. Michelle has had a hard time, Cathy whispered to me as we watched Michelle argue with a waiter. She just makes bad choices in men, but she has a good heart. I didn't say anything. I was an engineer. I knew that bad choices usually pointed to a structural flaw in character. But I was in love, and I figured that as long as they lived in their apartments and we lived in my house, everything would be fine. For the first year of our marriage, Cathy moved in and the house felt alive. She added plants, soft textures, and the smell of home-cooked ginger chicken. I paid for everything, the property taxes, the maintenance, the utilities, the groceries. I wanted her to feel taken care of, and since I had the means, it felt like the right thing to do. She used her salary for her own car payments, her designer clothes, and her social obligations. But then the leak started. Not in the roof. My roof was perfect, but in our boundaries. It started with the emergency fund. Cathy asked if she could start sending a bit of money to her mother. Her pension isn't enough for the medical bills, Cathy explained. I agreed. It was her money, after all. But then I noticed Cathy started asking me to cover more of our shared entertainment costs because she was a bit tight this month. Then came Michelle. Michelle lost her job at a real estate firm. Or rather, as I later found out, she was let up for misappropriating petty cash. Suddenly, Michelle and her two kids were at our house every Saturday and Sunday. They didn't just visit, they invaded. They would leave sticky fingerprints on my glass walls and crumbs in my koi pond. Michelle would lounge on my Italian leather sofa, barking orders at Cathy to bring her drinks, while she complained about her latest ex-boyfriend. I began to feel like a guest in my own sanctuary. I would retreat to my home office, the only room with a lock, and try to ignore the chaos outside. Cathy, this is getting to be a bit much, I said one Sunday evening after they finally left. The house smelled like sour milk and Michelle's heavy perfume. Their family, William, she said, her voice defensive. In Malaysia, we don't just shut our doors on family. It's not like in America, where you put everyone in a nursing home or leave them on the street. I'm not asking you to leave them on the street, I replied calmly. I'm asking for my house back. I retired to have peace, not to run a daycare for your sister's children. You have so much, and they have so little, Cathy said, her eyes welling up. Why are you being so calculated? Is this about the foundation again? I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something I didn't like. It wasn't just sadness, it was a hint of entitlement. She wasn't asking for my help. She was shaming me for my success. I didn't know it then, but the foundation was already starting to crack. The storm was coming, the kind of tropical monsoon that washes away everything that isn't anchored deep into the earth. And I was about to find out just how much of my life was actually anchored and how much was just floating on the surface. The piece of my TTDI sanctuary didn't vanish all at once. It was a slow erosion, like water seeping into a retaining wall. In my line of work, you learn that it's rarely a single earthquake that brings down a structure. It's the thousands of micro fissures that go unnoticed until the morning of the collapse. The first fissure was financial. Cathy had always been proud of her career, but as we moved into our second year of marriage, the independence she had touted started to look like a stage prop. I noticed she was constantly topping up her grab pay or asking me to cover the small things, utilities, the weekly grocery run to Village Grocer, the maintenance fees. I'm just helping Mom with a few things, she'd say, her eyes glued to her phone. She had a health scare. The private clinic in Bangsar is so expensive. Being a dutiful husband, I didn't question it. I'd seen the receipts for consultations. But a few weeks later, I saw Madam Lee at a family dinner wearing a shimmering new gold bracelet and carrying a handbag that I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage back in Seattle. When I mentioned it to Cathy, she brushed it off. It was a gift from a friend, William. Don't be so calculative. In Malaysia, we value Marua face. My mother cannot look like a beggar. There's a difference between looking like a beggar and living on my retirement savings by proxy, I thought, but I kept it to myself. I was trying to be the understanding expat. Then came the weekend occupation. It started with Michelle asking to use our guest room because her apartment's air conditioning had broken down during a particularly brutal heat wave. She arrived on a Friday night with her 2 kids, 3 suitcases, and a mountain of plastic toys. She didn't leave until Tuesday. By the 3rd weekend, it had become a ritual. Every Friday at 5 p.m., like clockwork, Michelle's battered Parajo Maivai would screech into my driveway. The kids, who had zero concept of indoor voices or respecting expensive Japanese koi, would treat my house like a theme park. I had spent thousands on a minimalist garden. They spent 10 minutes turning it into a muddy battlefield. The real crack in the foundation happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had just finished a difficult consulting call with a firm in Singapore and wanted nothing more than 2 fingers of the 18-year-old Macallan I had bought at the duty-free. It was my finish line bottle, the one I saved for particularly stressful days. I went to my bar cabinet, pulled out the heavy crystal bottle, and poured. The liquid looked off. It was too pale. I took a sip and nearly spat out. It was lukewarm oolong tea. I walked into the living room, where Cathy was watching a TVB drama. Michelle was sprawled on the other end of the sofa, scrolling through TikTok, while her youngest son was using one of my architectural drafting pens, a vintage German instrument, to color the fabric of my ottoman. "Cathy," I said, my voice tight, "where's my scotch?" Cathy didn't even look up. "Oh, Michelle had a few friends over on Sunday while you were at the golf club. They wanted to try some Ong Mo Western whiskey. She said you wouldn't mind. She replaced it so you wouldn't be upset. She replaced an 18-year-old single malt with cold tea." I felt the heat rising in my chest. Michelle finally looked up, her expression one of bored annoyance. William, it's just alcohol. Why are you so stingy? You have so much money in USD. I'll buy you a bottle of Chivas from the supermarket next time." "It's not about the money, Michelle," I said, stepping over a pile of discarded nuggets on my rug. "It's about the fact that this is my home, not a lounge. You don't take things that don't belong to you, and you certainly don't replace them with tea to hide it." "William," Cathy snapped, finally standing up, "you're embarrassing me in front of my sister. She's going through a hard time. Her ex-husband hasn't paid child support in months. Can't you have some compassion?" "Compassion doesn't mean I have to be a doormat," I replied. And Michelle put that pen down. "That is a professional tool, not a crayon." Michelle rolled her eyes, muttered something in Cantonese that I'm fairly certain wasn't a compliment, and went back to her phone. Cathy pulled me into the kitchen, her face flushed with anger. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed. "You're acting like a landlord, not a husband. This is my house, too." "Actually, Cathy," I said, my engineer's brain clicking into fact mode, "it isn't. We signed the agreement. I pay every cent of the upkeep. I love you, and I want you here, but I did not marry your sister or her children. I didn't sign up to provide a free-for-all for people who don't respect my property. You Westerners," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're all the same. Everything is mine, mine, mine. You don't understand us. You think your money gives you the right to be a king. But family is the only thing that lasts, William. If you push them away, you're pushing me away." She walked out, leaving me in the kitchen with a glass of tea-flavored water and the realization that the woman I married was disappearing behind a wall of cultural excuses. The next day, I installed a high-end digital lock on my home office. It was a small, defensive measure. I told myself it was just to protect my equipment. But deep down, I knew I was starting to build a fortress within my own home. I was an engineer. I knew how to read the signs. The soil was shifting. The house was beginning to tilt. And the rainy season was only just beginning. The sky over Kuala Lumpur didn't just leak that October. It disintegrated. If you've never lived through a true Malaysian monsoon, you can't imagine the weight of the water. It turns the air into a thick, gray soup and makes the city's drainage system scream. I was driving back from a 3-day golf trip into Seoul, my wipers fighting a losing battle against the sheets of rain hitting my windshield as I turned onto the familiar, leafy streets of TTDI. I was looking forward to the silence of my home. I wanted to sit by my koi pond with a book and listen to the rain hitting the glass roof. The very definition of the peace I had bought and paid for. But as I pulled into my driveway, my heart sank. There was a silver Proton Saga parked crookedly behind Cathy's car, and a Lalamove delivery van was just pulling away. Piled on my porch, shielded poorly from the wind-driven rain by the overhang, were stacks of cardboard boxes and several oversized suitcases. I sat in my truck for a full minute, the engine idling. My foundation alarm was screaming. When I walked through the front door, the humidity followed me in, but the atmosphere inside was even heavier. The living room looked like a disaster relief center. Michelle's children were shrieking, chasing each other around my granite kitchen island, while Michelle herself was bark ordering a delivery person over the phone. Madame Lee was already settled into my favorite ergonomic recliner, fanning herself and complaining loudly about the dampness of the neighborhood. Cathy was standing in the center of it all, her arms crossed, her face a mask of grim determination. She didn't greet me with a kiss. She didn't ask about my trip. "What is this, Cathy?" I asked, my voice low. I didn't want to start a scene in front of the kids, but the boundary hadn't just been crossed. It had been paved over. "We need to talk in the office," she said. "I can't go into the office," I noted, gesturing to the hallway. "There are 3 suitcases blocking the door." "That's because Mom is moving into the office," Cathy said. "Michelle and the kids are taking the guest suite. We'll have to move your drafting table into the garage." I felt a coldness settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Excuse me? Nobody is moving into the office. That's my workspace. And nobody is taking the guest suite indefinitely." "It's not indefinite, William. It's a crisis," she snapped. We stepped into the small laundry room and closed the door to get some semblance of privacy. The sound of the rain drumming on the metal roof above us was deafening. "Michelle was evicted this morning," Cathy continued, her words coming in a frantic rush. "The landlord changed the locks. She has nowhere to go, William. And Mom's apartment had a financial complication. The management cut the electricity. I couldn't leave them there." "A financial complication," I echoed. "You mean she stopped paying rent because she was busy buying gold jewelry and treating her Datton friends to high tea at the Ritz? Don't you dare judge her." Cathy's voice rose an octave, sharp enough to cut glass. "She is my mother. In Malaysia, we don't let our parents sit in the dark. We don't let our sisters sleep in cars. We have filial piety. We have family honor. Something you clearly know nothing about." "I know about responsibility, Cathy. I offered to help Michelle find a budget apartment 3 months ago. I offered to help your mother set up a realistic pension plan. They refused because they wanted to maintain face on my dime. And now you've invited them to live in my house without even a phone call to ask me." Cathy stepped closer, her eyes flashing with a predatory sort of intensity. This wasn't the woman I had met at the rooftop bar. This was someone using culture as a weapon to bypass respect. "I didn't ask because I knew you'd say no," she said coldly. "And I'm done asking. This is my life, William. These people are my blood. This house is huge. You're just one man. Why do you need so much space? Why are you so selfish?" "It's not about space, Cathy. It's about the fact that I spent 40 years working to earn this peace. I didn't retire to Malaysia to become the involuntary benefactor of your sister's bad decisions." "Then you've made your choice," she said. She leaned against the washing machine, her expression hardening into something final. "My sister and Mom are moving in. Tonight. I've already promised them. If you can't handle being part of a real family, if your premarital assets and your privacy are more important than my mother's dignity, then we are done. If you try to kick them out, you're kicking me out too. Choose, William, right now." The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, a crack of lightning illuminated the room, followed instantly by a boom of thunder that shook the floorboards. In that flash of light, I looked at Cathy and saw the calculation. She thought she had the winning hand. She thought that at 62, an American expat in a foreign land would be too afraid of being alone to risk his marriage. She thought I would fold, that I would grumble, but eventually write the checks and cede the territory. She forgot one thing. I am a structural engineer. I know when a building is no longer safe for habitation. I know when the cost of repair exceeds the value of the structure. Understood, I said quietly. Cathy blinked, a flicker of triumph crossing her face. So, you'll help Michelle bring the rest of the boxes in from the rain? No, I said, my voice as steady as a mountain. I mean, I understand the ultimatum. You've made it very clear where I stand in this hierarchy. You've decided that your family's lack of planning constitutes my permanent emergency. You've decided that my boundaries don't matter. William, don't start. I'm not starting anything, Cathy. I'm finishing it. I checked my watch. It was 7 p.m. I won't kick them out tonight. It's raining too hard, and I'm not a monster. They can stay the night. But don't unpack those boxes. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice wavering for the first time. I'm choosing the second option, I said. The one where we're done. I'll be out of here in an hour. You can have the house for the night to figure out your next move. My lawyer will be in touch by Monday morning. I walked past her, out of the laundry room, and straight to my office. I ignored Michelle's smirk as I passed. I ignored Madame Lee's demands for tea. I went into my room, grabbed my go bag, the one containing my passport, my MM2H papers, my property deed, and my laptop, and I walked to the front door. William, you're being dramatic, Cathy shouted, following me into the foyer. Where are you going? You can't just leave. Watch me, I said. I opened the door to the pouring rain, the humid air rushing in to meet me. The foundation is gone, Cathy, and I've lived long enough to know you don't stay inside a collapsing building. I stepped out into the storm, got into my truck, and didn't look back. I had a reservation at a hotel in Bukit Bintang, a very good lawyer on speed dial, and for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. The suites at the Pavilion Hotel in Bukit Bintang are high above the neon-lit chaos of Kuala Lumpur's Golden Triangle. Looking out the window that first night, I watched the traffic crawl like glowing insects along Jalan Sultan Ismail. My phone was on the nightstand, vibrating almost continuously with WhatsApp messages. William, where are you? Don't be a child. Come home and let's talk. My mother is crying. You've embarrassed us. Then, the tone shifted as the hours passed, and I didn't respond. Fine. Stay away. We are comfortable here anyway. Michelle is cooking. I turned the phone off. I knew exactly how they were feeling, triumphant. They thought they had successfully staged a bloodless coup. In Cathy's mind, she had called my bluff and won. She figured I was sitting in a hotel room, miserable and lonely, waiting for the right moment to come crawling back with an apology and a credit card to fund their new communal life. She didn't know that an engineer's first instinct when a structure fails is to safeguard the perimeter. The next morning, I met with Mr. Tan, a senior partner at a prestigious firm in Menara Prudential. He was a sharp, diminutive man who wore three-piece suits in the tropical heat and moved with the precision of a watchmaker. I laid out the blueprints of my life, the MM2H visa, the wire transfer record from my Seattle bank showing the TTDI house was bought entirely with foreign funds 2 years before I met Cathy, and, most importantly, our premarital agreement. Mr. Tan flipped through the pages, his fountain pen hovering. In Malaysia, for non-Muslims, the law reform, Marriage and Divorce Act generally respects premarital assets. Since you bought this house before the marriage and maintained it solely with your own funds, her claim to it is practically non-existent. The agreement only reinforces what the law already leans toward. I want her out, I said, and I want her family out. Immediately. We will file for divorce based on the breakdown of the marriage, Mr. Tan said, and I will issue a formal notice to vacate. Legally, she has 30 days, but we can make it very clear that your financial support of the household, the electricity, the water, the high-speed internet, is a courtesy that can be revoked. But I didn't wait for the slow grind of the courts. I had 48 hours of tactical movement planned. On Monday morning, I waited until my Nest camera showed Cathy leaving for her marketing job and Michelle driving the kids to whatever school they were sporadically attending. Madame Lee was the only one left, likely napping in my recliner. I arrived at the house with a large moving truck and 4 professional movers I'd hired with a heavy rush premium. I also brought a private security guard. When I unlocked the front door, the house already smelled different. The scent of fried shrimp paste and heavy floral perfume had replaced the clean, cedarwood scent I loved. Madame Leet jumped out of the chair, her hair in rollers, screaming at me in a mix of Cantonese and broken English. "William, what you doing? You crazy man. This is Cathy house now." "It really isn't, Madame Lee," I said, not raising my voice. I pointed to the movers. "Take the Eames chair. Take the Macintosh speakers. Take the drafting table from the garage. Everything on the list." For 3 hours, I systematically stripped the soul out of the house. I didn't take Cathy's things. I didn't take the shared towels or the cheap IKEA plates we'd bought together. But I took the heart of the home, the expensive, imported items that made the house a luxury sanctuary. I watched as my professional-grade espresso machine was wrapped in bubble wrap. I watched as my collection of vintage Malayan maps was taken off the walls. Madame Lee was on the phone, shrieking into the receiver. I knew she was calling Cathy. By the time Cathy's car screeched into the driveway, the truck was nearly full. She stormed into the living room, her face a mask of shock and fury. She looked at the bare walls, the empty spots where my high-end furniture had stood, and then at me. "What is this?" she screamed. "You're stealing. I'm calling the police." "Call them," I said, handing her a folder. "Inside you'll find the original receipts for every item being moved today, all dated before our wedding. You'll also find a copy of the deed and a formal notice to vacate served by Mr. Tan's office. You have 30 days to find a new place for your family." Cathy laughed, though it sounded hysterical. "You think you could just kick us out? I live here. I'm your wife." "You're a woman who gave me an ultimatum," I reminded her. "You said if I couldn't handle your family, we were done. I'm simply agreeing with you. We are done. Since you're so fond of Malaysian family values, I'm sure your mother and sister will be happy to help you pay the bills here for the next month." I leaned in closer. "By the way, the TNB, electricity, and air Selanger, water, accounts are my name. I've requested a transfer of service. In 48 hours, this house goes dark. I suggest you use that time to find a condo that fits Michelle's budget, not mine." The realization hit her like a physical blow. She looked around the cavernous, half-empty living room. Without my furniture, without my art, and most importantly, without the looming reality of my bank account, the house looked like what it was, an expensive, high-maintenance shell. "William," she said, her voice dropping the anger and replacing it with a desperate, sudden sweetness. "You're just hurt. I was stressed. We can put everything back. I'll tell Michelle they have to leave by the end of the month. They were supposed to leave by the end of the night, Cathy. You chose them over me. Now you get to keep them. All of them." I walked out to the truck, signaled the driver, and left. As we pulled away, I saw Michelle's car arriving. She hopped out, ready for a fight, but she stopped dead when she saw the empty house through the windows. Cathy was standing on the porch, holding the legal papers, looking small and overwhelmed by the massive, tropical storm clouds gathering once again over the city. She had wanted to show me that her family was a force of nature I couldn't resist. She had forgotten that I was the one who built the walls they were standing in, and I had just taken the roof with me. The following week was a masterclass in what I call social engineering. In Kuala Lumpur, word travels fast, especially in the tight-knit circles of the professional middle class. I started receiving concerned messages from mutual friends, people we had gone to brunch with in Bangsar or seen at gallery openings in Publica. "William, I heard things are rough. Is it true you left the family without water?" "Hey man, Cathy is pretty distraught. Maybe don't be so harsh. It's a cultural thing, you know." I ignore them all. I knew the narrative Cathy was spinning. The cold, calculating, orang puty white man who uses Western wealth to lure a local woman into a trap, only to discard her and her struggling family the moment things got real. But the reality was catching up to her. Living in a house with a 5-figure monthly upkeep, even without me there, requires more than just family values. It requires hard currency. She tracked me down on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at a local Mammoth stall in TTDI, just a few blocks from the house, but worlds away in spirit. I liked the Mammoth. It was honest. No industrial chic decor, just plastic chairs, the smell of frying onions, and the hypnotic sound of the Tatarik being pulled between two tin mugs. Cathy sat down across from me without an invitation. She looked exhausted. The humidity had frizzled her perfectly managed hair, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of expensive concealer could hide. She looked less like a high-flying marketing manager and more like someone who had spent 48 hours fighting a losing battle against the tropical heat. "You look tired, Cathy," I said, taking a sip of my tea. "It's been a nightmare, William," she said, her voice trembling. "The electricity was cut yesterday. Michelle's kids are crying because it's too hot to sleep. Mom is staying at a hotel on my credit card because she says she can't breathe in the house without the AC. Sounds like your family isn't providing the stability you promised me they would," I noted calmly. "How can you be so cruel?" she whispered, leaning across the battered metal table. "I'm your wife. I made a mistake. I was under pressure. I've told Michelle she has to find a job. I've told Mom she has to move back to the village. Just, please, come home. Pay the bills. We could go back to how it was." I looked at her, and for a second, the old William, the one who fell for her laugh at the rooftop bar, wanted to reach out. But the engineer in me was looking at the data. I had spent the last 3 days auditing our shared life, and the numbers didn't lie. "Cathy," I said, "I did some renovations on my bank accounts while I was at the pavilion. I noticed a series of withdrawals from our joint emergency travel account over the last 6 months. About 60,000 ringgit is missing." She froze. The damsel in distress mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flicker of genuine fear. I was going to tell you," she stammered. "Michelle had a debt. A dangerous one. Some people were calling her, threatening her. I had to pay it, William. She's my sister. You didn't pay it, Cathy. I paid it. You took money I had set aside for our anniversary trip to Japan and gave it to a woman who drinks my scotch and calls me a stingy foreigner behind my back. You didn't ask. You didn't even mention it. You just treated my labor as a communal resource for your family's incompetence. 60,000 ringgit. That's more than a year's salary for many people here. Money can be replaced," she cried, attracting looks from the nearby tables. "Family cannot. You don't understand our culture. We don't let our sisters go to the loan sharks. Culture is not a blank check for theft, Cathy. And filial piety doesn't mean I have to subsidize your mother's designer handbags while she lives in my house for free. You didn't want a husband. You want a golden goose that spoke English and had a U.S. retirement fund." She slumped back in the plastic chair. The culture defense was failing her because she knew I wasn't buying the performance anymore. "What am I supposed to do?" she hissed. "I can't support them all on my salary. The house is too expensive. The debt is too much. My credit cards are maxed out from Mom's hotel stay. You do what I suggested months ago," I said. "You find a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a more affordable area like Cheras or Ampong. You put Michelle to work, even if it's just folding clothes at a mall. You tell your mother that her days of being a socialite are over. You live within your means. That is what adults do." "But I'll lose face," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears of shame, not sorrow. "Everyone in the office knows I live in TTDI. They know I'm married, a successful American. If I move to a low-cost flat in Cheras, I'll be the laughingstock. They'll know you left me. They'll think I failed. You're more worried about face and what your coworkers think than the fact that our marriage is dead," I said, putting a 10 ringgit note on the table to cover my tea. "That tells me everything I need to know. You love the lifestyle I provided, Cathy. You don't love me." "William, wait." She grabbed my arm as I stood up. Her grip was desperate, almost painful. "I'll do it. I'll kick them out tonight. I'll change the locks. I'll call the police on Michelle if I have to. Just come back. I can't lose this life. I'll sign anything. I'll pay back the 60,000. I looked down at her hand on my arm. "You're only willing to kick them out now because the lights are off and the water is gone. You're not doing it because it's right. You're doing it because your ultimatum backfired. If I come back 3 months from now, there will be another emergency, another loan shark, another medical bill. And you'll expect me to pay because we're family. I promise, William. I promise. A foundation that has to be promised into existence is no foundation at all," I said. I gently but firmly unpeeled her fingers from my arm. "The house is being listed for sale or long-term lease next month. You have until the end of your 30-day notice to clear out. Whatever is left inside after they'll be donated to charity. You're a monster, she spat, the sweetness vanishing instantly, replaced by a venomous glare. You're just another colonialist who thinks he can buy and sell people. No, I replied, walking away toward my truck. I'm just a man who knows how to read a structural report. And this marriage, Cathy, was beyond economical repair. As I drove away, I saw her sitting alone at the Mammoth, surrounded by the steam of the kitchen and the roar of the city, frantically typing on her phone. I knew who she was calling. She was calling Michelle and her mother to blame them, or perhaps to find a new way to spin the story. But for the first time in years, it wasn't my problem. I drove back toward the city center, the skyline of Kuala Lumpur sparkling in the distance, feeling lighter with every kilometer I put between myself and the family I had nearly let destroy me. The legal proceedings at the Kuala Lumpur High Court in Jalan Duda were as sterile and efficient as my engineering blueprints. In Malaysia, the wheels of justice for civil divorces can move slowly, but when you present a judge with a mountain of evidence, receipts, wire transfers from American banks predating the marriage, and a signed premarital agreement, the outcome becomes an inevitable mathematical conclusion. Cathy's lawyer tried a final, desperate play. They argued non-financial contribution, claiming that her presence as a traditional wife had increased the value of my life and, by extension, my assets. But the judge, a sharp woman who seemed to have little patience for melodrama, looked at the records. She saw that I had paid for every repair, every utility, and even Cathy's personal emergencies. The respondent, the judge noted, has not demonstrated a partnership of shared burden, but rather a pattern of shared consumption. The decree nisi was granted. Because the marriage had lasted less than 3 years and the house was indisputably my premarital property, Cathy walked away with a modest settlement, essentially a refund of the face-saving money she'd spent on groceries and a small portion of the home's appreciation during our brief union. It was enough for a deposit on a small apartment in a distant suburb, but it was a far cry from the TTDI lifestyle she felt entitled to. The day of the final eviction was a quiet Tuesday. I didn't show up with a truck this time. I showed up with a locksmith and 2 security guards. I watched from across the street as Michelle loaded her battered Maivai for the last time. The suitcases were bulging, and the children looked confused, clutching plastic toys that had been bought with my money. Madame Lee stood on the sidewalk, fanning herself furiously, refusing to look at the house she had tried to colonize. She looked older, smaller, and significantly less gold-plated without the backdrop of my industrial modern living room. Cathy was the last to leave. She didn't look at me. She climbed in her car, her shoulders slumped, and drove away toward her new reality. A 2-bedroom walk-up in a crowded part of Cheras, where the face she worked so hard to maintain would be lost in a sea of identical concrete blocks. She was finally getting exactly what she had asked for, a life defined by her family's choices. Reclaiming my house felt like a purification ritual. I didn't just move my furniture back in. I hired a professional forensic cleaning crew to scrub every inch of the place. I wanted the smell of Michelle's cheap perfume and the ghost of Madame Lee's judgment erased from the walls. I replaced the rugs they had stained and the ottoman the children had ruined. But the house felt too quiet. For the first time in my life, the architect of solitude realized that a foundation is meant to support something alive, not just empty space. A week later, I visited the SPCA in Ampang. I wasn't looking for a designer dog to show off at the park. I wanted a companion who understood the value of a good home. I found him in the back corner of a kennel, a 3-year-old golden retriever who had been found wandering near a construction site. He was thin, his coat was matted, but his eyes were steady and full of a quiet, resilient hope. I named him Merdeka, the Malay word for independence. Merdeka doesn't care about my U.S. retirement fund. He doesn't invite his cousins to sleep on the sofa without asking. He doesn't drain my travel account to pay off loan sharks. He just wants to sit by my feet while I work on my consulting projects. And he greets me every morning with a loyalty that isn't contingent on a credit limit. Now, as I sit on my porch in the cooling evening air of TTDI, the KL skyline is beginning to glow in the distance. The Petronas Towers are shimmering like twin needles of light, and the humidity has finally broken into a soft, fragrant breeze. Merdeka is curled up near the koi pond, the water rippling as the fish surface for their evening feed. I think back to my father's legal pad and the math he showed me all those years ago. He was right about the assets, but he was only half right about the niceness. Being nice isn't the problem. Being a doormat disguised as a husband is. I've spent 62 years learning how to build things that last. I built bridges, I built skyscrapers, and I built a retirement in a beautiful, complex city halfway across the world. But the most important thing I ever built was the boundary that saved my life. The foundation is finally dry. The structure is sound. And for the first time in my life, I'm not just sitting in a house. I'm finally home. Thank you so much for reading William's story. If you found his journey through the complexities of family boundaries and property rights in Kuala Lumpur compelling, please make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people who might need to hear this kind of message. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another real-life storytelling script. Have you ever faced a family ultimatum like William? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay smart and protect your foundation.